And gentlemen, nice to see everyone joining on. Hi, Michelle. Hi, Janice. I think. Hi, Ruth. Shalom, shalom. I think. Hey, Mark. Nice to see you, my dear friend. Lovely to see you here. I always look so forward. I have to get the umbrella up. Hi, Captain. I always look so forward to seeing all of you, but obviously, this is always a little bit of a heavier um, visit to do here. So, hi, Christina. Hey, Susie. Nice to see you. Hi, Diane. Sorry if I miss people. I'm handling a little bit more just at the moment. Just hi, Walter. Is that right, Walter? Thank you for sharing that. Um, sorry, I'm. I think I'm. I don't know if the umbrella's working very well. It might get a little damp, everyone. I apologize. Let me see if I can reset this umbrella. So, I know that there's quite a few tours on right now, and I also know I changed the time of this tour, and it's just because my group are inside the building behind me. This is the Canadian Museum of War, which, um, the graveyards are full of indispensable men, as we say. But it is a very interesting interactive museum. And quick hello, I know we're suddenly going to have a lot of people sign on. Hi, Elise. We're going to have a lot of people sign on after the fact because I know Aaron and Patrick have a big tour going out. A lovely message from Patrick this morning saying they'll try and end on time. Hi, Melissa. So so I'm here in Ottawa. If you haven't met me before, my name's Patrick Toomey, and not that my family heritage really matters. There at the end, okay. But I'll come and show you in the window, and then we'll go over and have a little visit. It is I think it's fair to say, a genuinely yucky day here in the national capital. It was sort of snowing, sleeting sideways this morning, and then kind of turned into rain. Um, and so it's been one of those sort of days, but I've already come over, same in Glasgow, I bet, at least, yeah. Well, I've already been over for a tour of Parliament. And if you don't mind me sharing, which I'm sure you don't, no, but it's meant to be sunny tomorrow, NC, so I'm looking forward to that. And if you're around Ottawa, I'm going to meet Robert and family at about 10 to 1 for lunch at the Ottawa Sign in the Market. So if you happen to be around, um, so that's just a mention if you happen to be here. So there, there you're looking in. You can see some of the hardware. Wouldn't it be amazing if all of the money that built all these tanks and weapons had been spent on like healthcare and education? I always sort of feel that's a more worthwhile conversation. Um, yeah, I mean, it's when you hear about these big bombs that go off, like the falling on Ukraine right now, every one of those is $50,000, and I think that's a CF-18, which is invented in Winnipeg there, Canadian aircraft. So yeah, I'm quick hello to everyone. So obviously my name is Patrick Toomey. I live out in the Canadian Rockies. Hi, Larry. Nice to see you here. Hey, Michelle. So Larry and my friend Mark is on board. Um, is there an F-18 in there? Faith, I've walked through so many times. I never quite make it to the hardware, so I can't really tell you. Mark, I know, as a dear friend, has also tackled some very, very difficult subjects, and I try and tackle them as well. Um, this particular monument does mean something to me and my family, of course, because my mom is from, it's Jewish, I guess, Jewish background. And my son goes to synagogue. I don't. But that shouldn't be the only reason to give a tour like this, of course. I think that's one should acknowledge all of that. And it's very important. So we'll go in and start to have a look around. I'm sorry, I'm just literally cutting across the street. So I'm in the city of Ottawa right now, and I'm just by the bridge that could lead me over to the city of Gatineau in the province of Quebec. So this is obviously the national capital. In fact, before we start, hi, Elika, thank you. Hey, Robert. Just before we start with the actual monument itself, I'll just give you a little map. Because the day is just so flat and snowy and cold, I would like to just give you a sense of where we are right here at the moment. And you'll see the sign that says, Vous êtes ici. You are here. So the Chaudière Falls, and this is the mighty Ottawa River. It's where the Gatineau River comes in from the north, and the Rideau River comes in from the south, and that's why this ended up becoming the capital of Canada, as it was an all British route through Upper and Lower Canada. So that's why it's here. And this, hey, bonjour, Tova, shalom. If we look over here, we're looking across to the Canadian Museum of War. And of course, Canada's first. It's interesting that Tova's here from Manitoba, because I am here, Tova, with a group of Indigenous kids from Manitoba. Well, thank you, Cynthia. I did want to say I did a tour of Parliament this morning, and I have a photo. The students are just wonderful, Melissa. Of course they are, though. And they were given a grant for this. Like, seriously, I mean, it's. I have a lot that I want to share and some that I don't want to share. But I will tell you, I took a photo this morning, but I'm not going to share it on social media. But one of the young ladies, as we were going through the Parliament of Canada, we came up to the painting of John A. Macdonald, and she immediately had her portrait taken in front of him with her middle fingers raised. Thanks, Cynthia. Well, I mean, he went about eliminating Indigenous people from this country as an act, right? So it's a great photo. I'll show you, Robert, when I have lunch. So there's all the provinces and territories of Canada. I feel like I want to give another talk about Indigenous Canada at the moment, but this is why we're here today. And this is very, very important. So it wasn't finished till 2017. Now, let's keep in mind, that's right, Kristen. Let's keep in mind that obviously we're talking about the 1930s and 40s, one of the greatest crimes against humanity. And it took till 2017 to have a memorial built in Canada here. Canada has the third largest Jewish population in the world. It is important. It's a stylized Star of David. It is austere and appropriately so. There is an eternal flame, which is not in the winter here because of the weather. It's open all day. It does close at night, but generally speaking, I would say it's a monument that had to be here. What I will say, though, is there was one woman who was a student here, a Jewish student from the University of Ottawa, who advocated for this. But the funding for this came about from Tim Uppal, who was in the Stephen Harper government, but he was a member of Parliament from Edmonton and happens to be Sikh. And I think that is a really wonderful statement that different backgrounds and different cultures can unite around the fact that human rights matter, and memory matters, and we cannot make these sort of memories up. Now, the conditions today are pretty wet and yucky, so I don't know how good the views are going to be. Hi there, Natalie. So here it is, Monument National de l'Holocaust. It actually took a while. A rabbi did take responsibility for it. They had a while before they had actually written that 6 million people were killed, but that was, considered an error in design, not an intentional thing. Now you'll see it is very snowy in here, so I can't help you too much through here because I can't dig all the snow out. But here's the many different contributors to it all, and that's important to acknowledge them. But it's more that it's right over here. So Justin Trudeau actually opened it, but it was a Conservative government that came out and acknowledged this and contributed to it. So the National Holocaust Monument commemorates the 6 million Jewish men, women, and children murdered during the Holocaust and the millions of other victims of Nazi Germany and its collaborators. Now, I expect anybody on board here today is familiar with this history. If you are the sort of person that tries to discount this or downplay it, then you can either just leave right now, or you can come and have a personal discussion with me, because we all have a huge responsibility in all of these conversations. And I want to, if it's all right with everyone, focus, principally the crimes of it. I can't even go through it. I mean, the crimes of it just get me too choked up, but more about the Canadian role in all of this as well, because it's important to acknowledge that. But let's just have a little look. Obviously, I can't go upstairs because the escalator's all pulled in. We're right around freezing right now, so it's kind of half snowing and half raining. So it's kind of a miserable day. If it's sunny out tomorrow, it'll be a lot of fun. But there we go. Of course, I can tell you just and again, these conversations are not about me, but when I first started guiding, I was in Europe, and I loved the job and I got to travel all over. And then I took a group of students to a concentration camp. The first one I ever led was Dachau, and I thought to myself, goodness me, I can actually do something kind of important. And so the fact that I have, in my own little way, a fairly public voice, I think it's very important to be able to share some of this and have these conversations, because we need to remember this. And I always, every time I participate in any sort of Remembrance Day ceremony, the part that I take on the most is the never again part, um, and I think that's where we have to talk about. So Auschwitz Birkenau, all right, there we are. Bertinsky, by the way, is the architect of this monument. I think the monument's excellent, and it's really visible. It's pointing. The Star of David is pointing up towards Parliament. Incidentally, it is almost ice here, so I'm really watching my step. So if I suddenly just slip a bit, don't worry about me. I'm okay. That's right, Ruth. I share that so wholeheartedly, and I think it's a responsibility we all have to take on. And the old saying is, if it smells a bit like racism, it probably is, right? So just a good memory. So have a look. I mean, obviously, the images around here are powerful, and then we'll go through the sequential timeline and have that conversation. And it's I won't be able to go up here right now to show you the view of Parliament, but I can go out into the open field. But the remnants. Yeah, it does. My signal bounces around out here, but hopefully everyone's hearing me just fine. I just think all the cement plays a bit of a role in it. So so my kid isn't joining us today, unfortunately, because he's at school. But I told him I would be here today. So just come over here. They have the prayer room and the hiding place. So the Warsaw Jewish Cemetery. I'm sure you're familiar with some of this history, but the Warsaw Ghetto actually held off the Nazis longer than the Polish state did at one point. And of course, the utter decimation. I believe, if my statistics are correct, it was actually Latvia that lost as a percentage of its population the most Jewish population. But the utter annihilation of 6 million people. And it's interesting, as I'm traveling here, of course, with Indigenous kids as well, we talk a lot in this country about generational trauma. And I think it's an important thing to acknowledge. I mean, I think, the Irish have obviously echoed that through much of their history, ever since the Great Hunger. And of course, the gigantic Jewish diaspora, which of course has been important in Canada for years and years and years. And the original Jewish migration to this country tended to come over with British forces, is how they came over here. And then quite a substantial, of course, population in Montreal historically, Toronto, Calgary. But other people are here reading. I love to see people coming and reading these different signs. But I'll just wait for a lady to take her photo, and then we'll go up and we'll go through. This will be a little chronological, but it's important. I also want to talk, I think there is a sign up here about it, yeah. But particularly a man named Adrian Arcand, who was a very angry person in Montreal, and he led up the Canadian Nazi Party, but he started publishing newspapers saying that we cannot allow Jewish migration because everybody knew what was going to happen. We don't know necessarily that they were going to move to mass extermination, but it was pretty clear. Talk about the history of anti-Semitism, of course, it's actually easier to unpack than people think, because if you go back long enough into European history, of course, there was one group of visible minorities in many ways, and they were visible because of the way they dressed and where they went to church, and so it became the classic blame. Hi there, I gather a lot of people are probably joining on because I know Aaron and Patrick were just finishing up their tour, so a quick hi Lisa, so a quick hello to everyone. I am inside the Canadian Holocaust monument. So this was finished in 2017, excuse me. But it came about from a private member's bill in 2011, Tim Uppel, and finally finished, and very important here in the National Capital. So this monument commemorates the millions of men, women, and children who were murdered during the Holocaust, and recognizes those who survived, many of whom made their way to countries around the world, including Canada. Now, this is very important because, of course, the Jewish contribution to this country, I guess if you take all of us collectively, Jews represent about 1% of the population of Canada. And because of, well, one can argue because of the incredible focus on education that's been so important in Jewish culture for so long, there's always a disproportionate contribution to the society. So important to acknowledge that. So then let's always check our language too. You see how the Nazis, of course, called themselves the Nationalist Socialist Party. Well, now revisionist historians are trying to call that socialism. It is fascism and it's totalitarianism, and it rears its head again and again. That's right, Michelle. So So we need to just remind ourselves all the time and not play any of these games. Recently, we watched that verbose, horrible person down in the States, that Tucker Carlson, try and pretend that the January 6th thing was not an uprising. We cannot make this stuff up. So I expect many of you know these sort of stories. And that's why I want to try and move up and talk about a little bit the Canadian role in this. Keep in mind that if we go back to 1763, that was the signing of the Quebec Act. Now, the Quebec Act is something that is honored generally by Indigenous people in this country because it's where the British Crown acknowledged the nation-to-nation treaty. So that is something that we need to talk about historically. But with regard to our conversation today, the Quebec Act gave a fundamental sort of independence to the province of Quebec, but not so much to the province as to the Catholic Church. So basically, for the early years of this country, the 100 years before Canada becomes a country, the colony of Lower Canada, or what had been New France, all education and social services were governed by the Catholic Church. And that really doesn't change in many ways until women achieve suffrage in Quebec in 1944 and Indigenous women until 1960, right? But there was that entire conversation that went on. That's right, we're going to get up to that section there and see. So again, you're welcome to read these to what extent you want or need to. It's pretty obvious until, of course, we move up. And this is where I don't know how many times you can look at these images and not recoil from them. Interesting, this is Soviet Moldova, of course, in Ukraine. We can repeat the crimes of all of this around the world, and it's an interesting thing. When I first started guiding tours in concentration camps, there would be often people would burst into tears, and I understand that they should. But then someone would put their arm around them and say, "Oh, it's okay." No, it's not okay. That's the whole point. When we start to unpack this history, it's not okay, and it needs to be acknowledged. So here you go, the victims of the Holocaust. So Jews everywhere were the primary target of Nazi ideology. And doesn't it just stun you? I expect it doesn't stun some of you, but how often anti-Semitism rears its head, and so often. I'll give you one good example. I was in a conversation a few months ago with someone who obviously came from kind of the Canadian right, and suddenly started going on about George Soros. And I said, that's just anti-Semitic. And he had no idea what he was saying. But basically, it's the Jews in banking thing. No, sorry. Right. Well, it. Well, thank you, Cynthia. It's so this is where we start to get into the story, though, of this country. So obviously, European Jews saw what was coming. Right. It is veiled, and it's exactly right. And senseless atrocities. And hey, we can go through the list and we can name them again and again and again. But so about half the Jewish population fled. We are very lucky in this country that some of them did make their way over here, but not nearly that many. And why did they not make it over here? Well, Canada closed its borders, right? So the restrictive immigration policy, and I mean, I get it from two sides because I have the poster at home that says "No dogs are Irish" as well. But this was that early feel, and this Adrian Arcand movement, the Nazi movement of Canada, tried to use these backhanded arguments, which we still see, which would say, oh, we can't have them over here because they wouldn't fit in with our culture, so it wouldn't be fair to them. Right? Very easy backward arguments to make. So, early migration, and of course, this one mentions, of course, Chinese and people of African descent. Obviously the treatment of Chinese in Canada, the minute that they finished dying building the trains at half the wages and the most dangerous jobs, then the government brought in a head tax. Tracy, it absolutely, and it doesn't mean that I'm not a proud Canadian because like today, I walked into the parliament, the scrum comes from Canada. That means you can walk up and ask a politician anything you like. But we need to always lay all of this information on the table and have it wide open for all of us to talk about and ask ourselves and reflect in that mirror as much as possible. So, but that's how, in my opinion, we build an inclusive, progressive society, right? That's where we have that conversation. So it is interesting. I mean, we do talk about, um, oh, Tracy, yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, McGill University, of course, was also built by enslaved labor. So, so resistance came in many forms. Oh, and by the way, changing the name of a university is not erasing history. Right? It's acknowledging that maybe we don't want to celebrate certain things. Like, and often when I got out, actually, I'd like to talk about this point for a minute, if you don't mind. When it suddenly became um, such a big thing to say, you can't tear down statues. Should Germany still have statues of the Nazis everywhere? I mean, of course not. And I am very keen to say that the redevelopment of the German state in a post-war model with a pluralistic, active, proportional rep, federalist politics has proven that it isn't a cultural thing. It is actually a structural thing. And I think that's a conversation to have. So as we carry on, so Canada in the war, Canadian soldiers, including many Jewish soldiers in both wars. And of course, today earlier I was in, there's a room of silence in Parliament there, and they turn the pages every day. But you see these books, book after book, of people who died. World War One was fundamentally a colonial war. You go down into Quebec City and you see where Canadian troops went to round up French Canadians to make them go fight. Um, but interestingly, I will tell you just at this particular, the Canadians landed at Juno Beach, of course, in Normandy, and turned north up to the Netherlands. And we have, to this day, of course, there's a Tulip Festival in the city as a thank you from the Dutch royal family. Very, very close relationship with the Dutch ever since. But my grandfather was actually part of those forces. He had been university education, so he was a captain. And they went up and crossed over into Germany, and he actually entered a concentration camp. And it was interesting because his wife was Jewish, right? So, um, it's a really very powerful effect, and the kind of thing you never recover from seeing. But then the refugees after the war, and this is where Canada really let us down. We are now the most ethnically diverse country in the world, and overall, while cost of living is horrendous in this country, really overall, among the highest standard of living. And that is directly thank you to our policies of migration into this country. Um, and so I guess when we talk about the contributions that people have made, I think that's a very important acknowledgement. And as we see different waves of migrants, it's always easy to be resistant to them. And then as long as we keep a loving, active, pluralist society here, then every time you just kind of get better by it, right? Um, right now this country is going through a big, heavy process of reconciliation. I'm doing my best to be part of that, the little bit I can. But the Convention for the Prevention of Punishment of the Crime of Genocide was the first human rights treaty adopted by the United Nations General Assembly. So drafted by a Canadian, and that's where you start to see a switch in this country. But oh my God, it did not take over 6 million people murdered to start to acknowledge human rights. And this is really the legacy that I think is so important. Hi, Lucy. So important to talk about. So survivors of the Holocaust faced enormous challenges as they resettled in new countries. I remember on one of Mark's tours, a monument. In fact, Mark, when I'm over visiting you, you're going to have to show me. But the monument where the Jewish community felt they had to give a thank you, that one was just a stunning. I just didn't know that existed. But of course, that was just every attempt to try, bizarre, exact, every attempt to fit in. Recently, I had put up a TikTok video with a conversation I'd had with some French people who had voted for the National Front, and they were saying they voted against Macron. But again, this is where you have to stand up against it every time. But they use that line that you hear so often where they say, oh, there's racism both ways. It doesn't go two ways. I mean, communities will evolve culturally, but if they're not welcomed into the broader community, then they're wedged into a corner. And I think that's important. So let me wander. I know we don't have terribly long here, and I would have loved to go up the stairs to give you that view. But as you can see, we have a very heavy, snowy day. But let me come out and give you a bit of a view. I am going to bring the kids over. I call them kids. They're teenagers. I'm going to bring them over here for a wander around. And then I'm heading over. All my Ottawa friends are going to know we're going over to the RCMP stables, but it's quite funny or odd to take a group of Indigenous kids from Manitoba over there because they haven't had a very good relationship with the police force that started there over the years. The word Holocaust was invented, Karen, thank you, Ruth, was by a Polish academic. It's not a very old word, actually. Um, I'm just trying to remember. I'm sure someone here has it. But it's a word now that I think, it should never be, I guess I can't walk this way. It shouldn't be overused, but it can be acknowledged. So they are referring now to the North American Holocaust. So here's Place Vimy. Vimy was, of course, that huge battle in World War One, and so one Vimy is where the Canadian War Memorial is. Some people say that's when Canada became a country. The Battle of Vimy, I hope not. 7,500 Canadians were killed or wounded in about 2 hours in one morning in a colonial war. But let's just come around where I can give you another angle on it. No, Karen, it won't be. No, it's just the stables, and it sort of gives the history of the RCMP. And I really waffled on even going there on this one with these kids because they just have a whole different feeling about it. But we'll go and do that. We are going to go to Dorito Hall. Yeah, I don't even know if I'd have permission to stream it. I probably would. I did put up one this afternoon because I'm going to be up by the National Gallery, so I thought I would kind of walk the other way from where I walked the other day. So, but yeah, let me walk around to the front of the memorial. And again, the stylized Star of David, where it's pointing up towards Parliament. You can see the Peace Tower way in the distance. If I can put down the umbrella, I'll zoom in on the Peace Tower up there. This is, of course, thanks, Pam. This is, of course, the coldest capital city in the world. Yeah, I guess his coronation, King Charles III, is going to be May 5th or 6th. So I will be in London. I'm flying home on the 5th, so I wouldn't have gone anyway, but I'll miss it. And let's come around to the front here. I do like the fact that it's a little reminder as it looks up towards Parliament that we have to have these conversations. Thanks, Lucinda. So it's, and I like, so these are the other entrances. Everything's closed, of course, with all the snow, but please be respectful. And it was interesting. There was a group of people there having a look around. They heard me giving a talk, and they were super respectful. Across from us is actually a monument to firefighters here in Ottawa. And then if you look to the buildings on the other side there, that is actually the province of Quebec and the city of Gatineau. So here we are. Now I can give you this image down the side here of the National Holocaust Monument. I think it's striking. I really do think it's well done. Because last time I took you here, it was slightly better weather. It was a bit clearer. But I always feel there's something to be said when you have these monuments and this very austere look. Absolutely, NC. Yeah. I took the kids over there just yesterday. So there you get it from an angle. And you'll see the way it's sort of pointing forward. And then you move over here. And, of course, the War Museum is also pointing up towards Parliament. And I guess, it's not always whether you're fighting, but what you're fighting for is probably the bigger part of the conversation. And this, the fact, it's a little bit, well, I shouldn't say a little bit, it's very similar when I climb into the history, which I have over the last 15 years of my life, the history of enslavement more. And you get into the inhumanity, thank you both, of the Holocaust. When you climb into the history of these things, they're always worse, right? They're always even more brutal. To let society sink into the inhumanity, and this again is where I think, if you are lucky enough to have a bit of a public voice, it's important to me that with this monument right here, last year for 3 weeks, our national capital was taken over by angry protesters. Now, I'm all for a good protest. Don't get me wrong. I have many times marched with large groups of people. But as I've said so often before, if you're in a protest and you look to your left and you look to your right and someone on your side is carrying a swastika, you're on the wrong side. Thanks, Mark. And in this country now, the so-called freedom convoy people are now the ones, and again, not all of them, right? But but they're going around, and their new target is drag shows. So even though they care about freedom, I mean, uh, my son, who many of you know, lovely Finn Toomey, I've taken him to drag shows. I mean, he was 3 when we went to our first Pride Week in Vancouver, and he had a blast. Right? It was so much fun. And you know what? He wasn't groomed into anything. so so there are really easy triggers. And Finn's uncle, who we're all extremely proud of, was just given a national award in Australia because, well, he is Indigenous, but he works in Indigenous employment. But he was the one that came up with that phrase, if it kind of smells like racism, it probably is. And again, we must be careful not to always trip over ourselves to get really upset about a single word or something, because that doesn't make the conversation inclusive. There are generational differences, but the general ethos of what we're working towards. And I do think it's pretty black and white. I mean, you either believe in a world of dignity and human rights, some sort of inclusion, or you don't. Um, and if you don't, then we have a fundamental difference, right? Our head's on the unknown shoulder. Yeah, the flame is not on at the moment, I don't believe, just because of the weather. And see, I had read that. So ladies and gentlemen, we've already kind of hit quorum. I know this has just flown by. Yeah, Melissa. Well, particularly because the term race, of course, is just such an erroneous term from the very beginning. But, there's broader conversation now about that. Thanks, Robert. Hi, Laura. I'm very sorry you're just coming on in the last minute. I know I had changed the time of this visit, but that's just because it turned out I had a reservation at 10 o'clock over at the War Museum here. These students I'm with have got a full packed day. They've done Parliament, they've done the museum. I'm going to bring them over to the monument now. Then we're going to the RCMP. Then I'm heading up to Byward so they can have some lunch. And then we are doing Rideau Hall with the Governor General. Yes, and yep. And then the National Gallery. So it's a busy day for them. So that's why I put up an afternoon tour. So there's the provinces and territories, of course, and the national flag. Thank you, Jane. I have a favorite flag here. It's the very far one on the left because it's Nunavut for lots of reasons. I think it's a gorgeous flag. Thanks, Laurie. The yellow and white with a red Inukchuk in the middle. Well, Tracy, that's kind. I honestly do, and I'm not. I mean, I am being paid to do this, but I would do these trips pro bono. I say yes to anything that's Indigenous, and that's because I grew up with a lot of racism around Indigenous people, and I have to be part of the solution. This is part of the conversation, right? I mean, my family ranched in southern Alberta. We drove down to the ranch, right through Picanee, which is the 3rd or 4th largest reserve in the country, and there was always that kind of snide comment. Ooh, look how they live. So you know what? Let's generational trauma is I don't know how important I could probably go in. I could probably get permission to do the museum, although it's such a huge cement museum that I think there'd actually be reception issues in there. I will tomorrow be in the Canadian Museum of History. In fact, we're going to the IMAX, so I'm really excited about that. And let me just turn this around because not so much for me, but because you can see the monument behind me. It's not often you see me with an umbrella, but there I see. So, ladies and gentlemen, listen. Yeah, I borrowed this from my driver, by the way, who is actually just a fantastic guy, and he's quite new to driving. But it was nice because he told me he was, and so then we just have fun. You should be, Robert. You should be there to hold it. So, ladies and gentlemen, listen. Thank you. I sort of feel when I'm in the capital here. Well, thank you, Cynthia. It's they're important. They are, Michelle. I think they're, it's we don't need to be heavy about things all the time, but these kind of monuments are here. Canada is a massive, massive country, and so it's a huge effort to get to the national capital for a lot of people. Well, you're welcome, Catherine, and And I do encourage you. Mark does an excellent one in Amsterdam, which is, of course, well, I think because of Anne Frank, it's just so synonymous with understanding this history. But over here in this country, I think it's really, really important to talk about all of this. Let me just give you a little peek from far on the other side of Parliament Hill up there with the national bird flying over it. Two cranes, and oh my goodness me, I was in the new visitor center this morning, and it was banging on the walls. Tough for the people who work there. Um, but yes, I look forward to catching up with my Ottawa friends. I've so little free time on this, but I don't mind, right? And having a good old time. So ladies and gentlemen, well, thanks for following, but all the very best. And well, thanks, Walter. It's next time I'm in the peg, Walter, we got to do a big. Tom's a really nice guy too. So yeah, I'll have to try and catch one. I always have time zone issues with those ones, but I want to say, and really mean it this time, peace and love, and it's an honor to share it, but we shouldn't have to share it. I guess as a very last reflection on all this, for all those people who got so upset about lockdowns during the pandemic, well, officially Canada had 51,000 deaths directly to COVID, and had we not had sorry, but I know, but Patrick and Aaron, such lovely guys. Um, but had we not locked down, that number could have been a couple of million. And so, wouldn't it be better if we had prevented the rise of that sort of anti-Semitism, so we don't have to walk around monuments talking about 6 million dead people? Um, Yep. Well, they're saying what was the final 17 million around the world so far quantifiably, but in cities like Lagos, I don't think the statistics are very fair. So, but I mean that's the kind of thing. Like there's two things about this kind of history, right? We can't um yeah, isn't it interesting? But thanks, Laura. But so it's all these sort of things you can't kind of measure a negative but anyway, on that note, we've crossed time. I know there's other tours on. I don't want to get in anybody's way. So lots of love, everyone. And well, we need to learn from it, right? So anyway, there's my big yellow bus out there, and there's the young lady running across the street who who, who made her feelings of Johnny McDonald known very well. So all right, all the very best. Lots of love. Take care. Bye bye.